Imagine waking up in a quiet, seemingly ordinary neighborhood where everything appears peaceful and normal. But behind the walls of one unassuming home, a dark and horrifying secret lies in wait, one that would leave the entire community reeling in shock. In a house that had always seemed like a place of comfort, a woman lived among the dead, surrounded by bodies that she had either killed or allowed to perish. This is the true story of Mary and, a woman who became the living embodiment of terror, hiding her grisly secret in plain sight. How did this woman go from being a quiet neighbor to the perpetrator of one of the most shocking crimes ever uncovered? To understand the chilling truth, we must first dive into the life of Mary and, a woman who seemed like anyone else at first glance but was hiding something so monstrous that it would forever change the course of her life and the lives of those around her. Mary Ann Smith was a woman who blended seamlessly into the fabric of her suburban neighborhood. She had a soft smile, a quiet demeanor, and a life that appeared to be perfectly ordinary. A widow, Mary Ann had lived alone for 5 years after her husband's death, or so it seemed. To those who lived in the neighborhood, she was simply known as a woman who kept to herself, never asking for help but never turning anyone away either. She would take walks with her dog late in the evening, her eyes often distant as if lost in thought. Neighbors would occasionally exchange pleasantries, but no one ever truly knew her. What they didn't know was that inside her home, Mary Ann was hiding a secret so disturbing, so incomprehensible, that it would leave even the most seasoned investigators stunned. Her house, which appeared to be just another modest dwelling on Elm Street, had become a macabre house of horrors. Behind its walls were dead bodies, carefully hidden, preserved in a twisted manner that no one could ever have imagined. The house had always been quiet, almost too quiet. Mary Ann was never seen entertaining guests, nor did she ever invite anyone over for a simple chat. Her life was private, almost too private, and this air of isolation masked the terror she was living with and the horrors she was creating. Mary Ann's neighbors had no idea that within her seemingly ordinary life was a deadly and calculated killer. It wasn't until an anonymous tip reached the authorities that anyone started to question what was going on inside Mary Ann's home. The tip-off was vague but unsettling enough to prompt a visit from the local police. When they arrived at the house, no one could have predicted what they would uncover. As the officers approached the front door, they felt a strange unease that they couldn't explain. It wasn't just the silence that hung over the house. It was the unnatural stillness, a feeling of being watched even though no one was around. When they finally stepped inside, the air hit them first. It was thick, oppressive, with a heavy scent of decay lingering in every corner of the home. The light in the house was dim, almost suffocating, and the first thing the officers noticed was how strangely neat everything appeared. There was no mess, no signs of disarray, and yet there was something terribly wrong. In the living room, a body lay on the floor, perfectly positioned as if the person had just been watching television. Her eyes were wide open, fixed on the screen, frozen in place. It was Mary Ann's elderly mother, who had been missing for months. No one had suspected foul play. She had been in poor health, and her absence was dismissed as a natural death. But the reality was far more sinister. As the officers moved through the house, they uncovered more bodies, some hidden in closets, others tucked away in the attic, and a few even in the basement, all placed with unsettling precision. The bodies were in various stages of decomposition, and some had clearly been there for weeks, maybe longer. The most shocking discovery, however, was of Mary Ann's husband, a man who had been presumed dead for years. His body was found in the attic, mummified and hidden in an old blanket, a grim reminder of how long he had been lying there, unnoticed and forgotten. But it wasn't just her family members who had met such a grim fate. The investigation revealed that Mary Ann had lured strangers into her home, promising them refuge or comfort, only to kill them or allow them to die in the same manner. Some had been missing for years, their disappearances written off as mere accidents or natural causes. But in Mary Ann's home, their final resting places were revealed, each death carefully orchestrated and hidden from the world. It seemed as though Mary Ann had turned her home into a tomb, a place where death was a constant companion, and she was its mistress. The most puzzling aspect of the case was the apparent calmness with which Mary Ann had lived among the dead. The authorities were baffled by her nonchalant demeanor when they first confronted her. She didn't seem disturbed or upset. She didn't even show the slightest hint of guilt. When questioned, she remained eerily composed, giving simple, almost robotic answers. "I did what I had to do," she said, almost as if discussing a mundane task. "They were better off dead." As the investigation continued, the pieces began to fit together. The police found evidence that suggested Mary Ann had been planning the murders for years. Her journals, found tucked away in her bedroom, offered a glimpse into her mind. The entries were chilling, revealing her feelings of abandonment and her twisted sense of justice. Mary Ann's upbringing had been marred by abuse and neglect, and she had always felt isolated and unloved. In her journals, she detailed her plans, each murder, each victim, and the control she believed she had over their lives and deaths. To Mary Ann, her actions were justified. She wasn't a killer, she was a savior. She believed that by ending their lives, she was freeing her victims from the suffering of existence. To her, it was mercy, not murder. The psychological profile of Mary Ann suggested a deeply disturbed individual, someone who had become disconnected from reality. Experts debated whether she suffered from antisocial personality disorder, a condition often linked to a lack of empathy and disregard for others' lives. Her cold, calculated actions seemed to support this theory. But as investigators delved deeper into her past, it became clear that Mary Ann's mental state was influenced by a combination of factors: childhood trauma, years of isolation, and a deep-rooted need for control. As the pieces of her life fell into place, it became evident that Mary Ann was not a woman driven by random violence, but one whose every move was meticulously planned, each victim chosen carefully. The trial of Mary Ann Smith became a media sensation, drawing in spectators from across the country. The courtroom was filled with tension, with every word spoken being dissected for deeper meaning. Mary Ann's demeanor remained unerringly calm throughout the proceedings, a stark contrast to the horror of her actions. She showed no remorse for the lives she had taken, no regret for the bodies she had left behind. Her defense team argued that she had been suffering from mental illness, that she was a victim of her circumstances, but the jury was not swayed. They saw her as a cold-blooded killer, a woman who had lived in darkness for far too long. In the end, Mary Ann was convicted of multiple murders and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The case shook the community to its core, leaving everyone to question how someone so ordinary could harbor such evil within. But even as the gavel fell and Mary Ann was taken away, the mystery of why she had done it remained. Was she truly a victim of circumstance, or was she simply a monster hiding behind a mask of normalcy? But as the years went on, new developments emerged that would shock everyone once again. Evidence surfaced that cast doubt on the entirety of the investigation, hinting that there was more to Mary Ann's story than anyone could have imagined. The strange and unsettling discoveries continued to unfold, and it seemed like the nightmare was far from over. What if Mary Ann had not been acting alone? What if her actions were part of something larger, something far more insidious than anyone had ever believed? There were whispers of other accomplices, of a secretive network that extended beyond Elm Street, pulling the strings from the shadows. And as the police dug deeper into Mary Ann's past, they uncovered a connection that no one could have predicted, a connection to a chilling series of murders that stretched back decades. Was Mary Ann just the tip of the iceberg? As the investigation reignited, the questions multiplied. What secrets was Mary Ann still hiding? And more terrifyingly, who else was involved in her gruesome plans? As new revelations came to light, the authorities found themselves facing a terrifying truth, one that would unravel everything they thought they knew about Mary Ann and the horrors she had inflicted on her unsuspecting victims. The story of Mary Ann Smith was far from over, and the most terrifying part was yet to come. If this story left you questioning the dark side of human nature, don't forget to subscribe for more true crime documentaries. The discovery of Mary Ann's horrifying acts had initially seemed like the end of a long, chilling chapter, one that left the community of Elm Street in complete shock. The police had pieced together the horrors of her home, each body uncovered revealing a twisted narrative of calculated violence, a sadistic sense of control over life and death. Mary Ann was convicted, her fate sealed, or so it seemed. However, as the years passed, something began to stir beneath the surface, a faint whisper that would soon grow louder, pulling the investigation in a direction no one had ever expected. It all began with a letter. It arrived at the police department months after Mary Ann's trial, unsigned, but its contents were as cryptic as they were unsettling. The letter spoke of things only someone deeply connected to Mary Ann could know, and it hinted at a far-reaching conspiracy, one that stretched well beyond the confines of Elm Street. The writer claimed that Mary Ann's murders were not isolated acts of violence, but part of a larger, more sinister operation. At first, the authorities dismissed it as another wild theory, another desperate attempt to seek attention. But as they began to investigate the claims, it quickly became clear that there was something far darker at play. The investigation into the letter led to a hidden network of people who had been unknowingly involved in Mary Ann's web of terror. Some were connected through her personal relationships, long-lost acquaintances, former neighbors, and even distant family members. Others had no direct link to her, but their disappearances had somehow been overlooked, forgotten. What was most disturbing, however, was the realization that Marianne's actions might not have been as solitary as they initially appeared. This was a thought that gnawed at the minds of the investigators as they delved deeper into the mystery. Evidence began to surface that suggested Marianne had been part of a much larger underground group. Whispers about the group had been circulating for years, but they had always been dismissed as baseless rumors. Now, however, the pieces were falling into place. The strange disappearances of several people across different states, all of whom had seemed to vanish without a trace, were suddenly linked to Marianne's past. The police found links between her and these individuals, meetings, phone calls, and even hidden messages that had been exchanged long before her arrest. It became clear that she had been in contact with someone or something that had guided her actions. But who or what was behind it all? The investigation took an even more disturbing turn when they uncovered a series of photographs hidden in the attic of Marianne's former home. The photos were of people who had never been reported missing, people whose names had never appeared in any database. These individuals were all taken in moments of vulnerability. Some were captured in their homes, others at work, and a few even in broad daylight on the streets. The photos had been meticulously arranged in a way that suggested a chilling form of organization. There were images of people who had been forced to stand, posed as though they were unaware of the impending danger. In some photos, the subjects appeared to be drugged, their faces lifeless and blank. These photographs were not just memories, they were trophies. Among the photographs, there was one that sent a chill down the spine of the investigators. It was a picture of a man who appeared to be in his mid-50s, well-dressed and well-groomed, standing in front of what appeared to be an upscale hotel. His expression was neutral, but there was something in his eyes, a coldness, an emptiness that made the officers uneasy. This man was no stranger to the investigation. He was someone the police had encountered earlier, someone who had been involved in a bizarre incident just before Marianne's arrest. His name was William Carter, a successful businessman who had recently moved into the area and had become somewhat of a local fixture. He was charming, confident, and always seemed to know the right people. But no one had ever suspected him of being connected to Marianne's macabre operation. It was William Carter's connection to Marianne that sent the investigation spiraling into a new realm of horror. The investigators traced Carter's business dealings, uncovering a web of financial transactions that seemed to have no legitimate purpose. Large sums of money were transferred to accounts with no clear origin, and companies that appeared to be legitimate on paper turned out to be fronts for something far more disturbing. Carter's involvement with Marianne was deeper than anyone had imagined, and as the police dug further into his past, they discovered that he had been involved in a number of shady deals, each one more sinister than the last. The investigation team learned that Carter had been working alongside Marianne for years, manipulating her into committing these murders, using her as a pawn in a much larger, more calculating plan. But what was his ultimate goal? Was it money, power, or something more personal? The answers eluded them as Carter's connections to other influential people began to surface. He had ties to powerful figures in various industries, some of whom had no known connection to the murders. This opened up a whole new line of questioning. Was Carter part of a secret society, a clandestine group operating in the shadows, orchestrating deaths for reasons that had yet to be revealed? As the investigation continued, the police discovered that Carter was not working alone. A woman named Jessica Hale was linked to the organization, a woman who had vanished without a trace years earlier. Her name had come up in the early stages of the investigation into Marianne's case, but no one had made the connection until now. Jessica Hale was a former associate of William Carter, a woman who had been seen in some of the photographs found in Marianne's attic. Her disappearance had been quietly covered up, but now it seemed she was more than just a missing person, she was a key player in this dark conspiracy. With each new discovery, the investigation into Marianne's case grew more complex, more twisted. What was once thought to be a simple case of murder had morphed into something far more disturbing. The more they uncovered, the more it seemed like the entire town was sitting on a powder keg of dark secrets, waiting to explode. And just when it seemed like they were getting closer to the truth, something unexpected happened. The police received another anonymous tip, but this one was different. The message was simple, chilling, and cryptic. She's not alone. They're coming for you next. The message sent shockwaves through the investigation team. Who was the they in the message? What did it mean? Was Marianne still connected to these people? Or was there something much bigger at play? The implications were terrifying and the clock was ticking. As the authorities scrambled to decode the meaning behind the message, a sense of impending doom hung over them. They had uncovered a trail of murder and deceit, but was it leading them to the ultimate truth? What do you think happened to Marianne? Was she driven by madness, or was there something more to her actions? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe for more true crime documentaries. The chilling words of the anonymous message, "She's not alone. They're coming for you next," hung in the air like a thick fog, clouding the investigation with an ominous sense of dread. It had only been a matter of weeks since the authorities had unearthed the horrifying truth about Marianne's gruesome murders, but now they found themselves spiraling into a labyrinth of deception and terror that seemed to have no end. The unsettling discovery of the photographs and William Carter's involvement had opened a new chapter, one that revealed a terrifying underworld of organized crime, where murder was not only a means to an end, but a twisted game orchestrated by those who reveled in the suffering of others. The community was left reeling, unsure of who to trust or where safety could be found. But as the investigation deepened, one thing became painfully clear. The truth was even darker than anyone could have imagined. The connection between Marianne and Carter, along with the shadowy figure of Jessica Hale, had led the investigators to a place they could never have anticipated. The hidden society they were up against wasn't just about money, power, or influence, it was about control, fear, and manipulation. Every move they made seemed to be calculated, designed to send the police into disarray, and just when they thought they were close to uncovering everything, the trail would grow cold, or worse, would lead them down another dead end. The message had made it clear that they were not dealing with a single madwoman, but with a far-reaching network of people who had committed unimaginable acts and were determined to stop anyone who threatened to expose them. The stakes had never been higher. Yet despite the mounting terror, the investigation pressed forward. Police efforts to track down Carter had become more urgent than ever, especially when they discovered that his network had its claws in numerous parts of the city. His ties to influential figures, business moguls, politicians, and other shadowy players meant that he had eyes and ears everywhere. It wasn't just his wealth and power that made him dangerous. It was his ability to manipulate others, to use them as pawns in a deadly game. Jessica Hale, whose disappearance had once seemed like a tragic, isolated event, was now revealed to be a key player in this twisted web. She had been part of a larger faction, a subgroup within the network, and it became evident that her role was to act as the enforcer, the one who ensured the murders and disappearances stayed hidden. But even as the investigators pieced together the fractured puzzle of Marianne's involvement, something unsettling lingered. Carter, Hale, and others in the network had seemingly vanished into thin air, slipping through the cracks just when they thought they had finally cornered them. But the police were determined to not let this case be swept under the rug. The pressure was mounting, not just from the community, but from those who sought justice for the victims who had never been given a voice. Finally, it was a breakthrough in a hidden safe house that changed everything. An informant, someone with deep ties to the underground network, came forward. Their identity was kept secret, but the information they provided was nothing short of explosive. The informant detailed the full extent of the operations that had been running under the radar for years. They spoke of how Carter had used a legitimate business empire as a front for his darker dealings, recruiting vulnerable individuals into his web of control, using fear and intimidation to ensure their silence. But the most shocking revelation came when the informant revealed that Jessica Hale had been operating as a recruiter for these criminal activities, using her charm and manipulative tactics to bring in individuals who were then coerced into murder. As the investigation unfolded, the police pieced together the network's operations, how they had been targeting families, exploiting them emotionally, and convincing them to hand over control of their lives in exchange for promises of safety. Many of the missing people had been promised jobs, opportunities, and refuge, only to end up dead or lost forever. It was a ruthless operation, one that preyed on the weak and the desperate. With this newfound information, the investigation took a turn for the better. Authorities launched a full-scale raid on one of Carter's properties, uncovering an entire underground operation that stretched far beyond what they had initially feared. Evidence gathered from the raid revealed documents, financial transactions, and even videos that showed how victims were manipulated and killed. The connection between Carter, Hale, and Marianne had been undeniable, and their role in orchestrating the deaths of countless individuals had been made clear. But the most shocking aspect of the raid was the discovery of a hidden room, a room where the final plans for future murders were documented. There were names, dates, and plans that stretched far into the future. Carter and Hale had been planning even more deaths, and the realization that they were only beginning their reign of terror left the police stunned. The net was tightening around them. The breakthrough sparked a series of arrests, and as law enforcement closed in on Carter, they found him hiding in plain sight, in a lavish penthouse apartment with no intention of fleeing. The man who had once seemed untouchable was now facing the consequences of his actions. He had underestimated the will of the people, the resolve of those who sought justice for the victims who had died under his watch. But it wasn't just Carter who was brought to justice. Jessica Hale, the enforcer of the network, was arrested soon after. The woman who had once been a ghost in the case was now forced to confront the atrocities she had committed. And as she sat in the